The door slammed shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the quiet Virginia suburb. Ethan, barely 18, stood frozen on the porch, his backpack slung over one shoulder. His father's words, "You're no son of mine," burning in his ears. The world spun, and all he could do was walk away, each step heavier than the last, into a life he hadn't chosen but could no longer avoid. 5 years later, in a cramped Brooklyn apartment, Ethan Carter traced the edges of a faded photo of him and his dad, Tom, fishing by Lake Anna when he was 12. The memory stung, not because it was gone, but because it was the last time he felt like he belonged. Now, at 23, Ethan had built a life in New York, piecing together a fragile sense of home with his boyfriend, Lucas Reed. Lucas, a 25-year-old barista with a quick smile and a knack for fixing things bikes. Hearts. Broken dreams had become his anchor. But the past wasn't done with Ethan. Not yet. Tom Carter, Ethan's father, still lived in that same Virginia house, a widower haunted by the silence his anger had created, a retired mechanic with calloused hands and a stubborn heart. Tom had always believed in hard work, family, and the Bible until the day Ethan came out. That moment shattered his world, not because he hated his son, but because he didn't know how to love him through his own fear. Now, at 52, Tom spent his evenings alone, flipping through old photos, wondering where he'd gone wrong. In Brooklyn, Ethan and Lucas sat at their tiny kitchen table, a letter crumpled between them. It was from Ethan's younger sister, Mia, now 16, who still lived with Tom. The letter was short but desperate. "Dad's sick. Ethan. Lung cancer. He won't say it, but he needs you." Ethan's hands shook as he read it again. Lucas reached for him, his voice steady. "You don't have to go back. But if you do, I'm with you." Ethan nodded, but the thought of facing his father again felt like stepping into a storm. The decision wasn't easy. Ethan had spent years burying the pain of that night, his father's rejection, the way the door locked behind him, the sound of his mother's sobs from the kitchen before she passed away a year later. But Mia's words tugged at him, a reminder of the family he'd lost and the slim chance to mend it. Lucas, ever the optimist, saw it differently. "Maybe he's changed," he said, squeezing Ethan's hand. "Maybe he's ready to listen." The next morning, they packed a small bag and boarded a bus to Virginia. The ride was quiet, Ethan staring out the window at the blurring trees, Lucas sketching in a notebook little doodles of city skylines and Ethan's profile. As they crossed state lines, Ethan's stomach knotted. What would he say? What could he say to a man who'd thrown him out for loving someone? Lucas, sensing his tension, leaned over and whispered, "We're in this together. Always." It was enough to keep Ethan from bolting at the next stop. They arrived in Ethan's hometown by late afternoon, the air thick with the scent of pine and nostalgia. The house looked smaller than Ethan remembered, the paint peeling, the porch sagging. Mia was waiting outside, her dark hair tied back, her eyes wide with relief when she saw Ethan. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around him. And for a moment, Ethan felt whole again. "He's inside," Mia said, glancing at Lucas. "He doesn't know you're coming." Ethan hesitated, his heart pounding. Lucas stepped forward, his presence grounding. "Let's do this," he said, his voice firm but kind. They walked up the porch steps, each creak louder than the last. Ethan raised his hand to knock, but the door opened before he could. There stood Tom, older, frilier, his eyes widening at the sight of his son. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lucas, ever brave, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," he said. "I'm Lucas, Ethan's boyfriend. We need to talk." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth and consequence. Tom's face tightened, but he didn't slam the door. Instead, he stepped back, gesturing them inside. Ethan's heart raced. This was the moment he'd both dreaded and dreamed of. The truth, long buried, was about to surface, and nothing would be the same. The living room smelled of old wood and faint cigarette smoke, a stark contrast to the sterile air of Ethan's Brooklyn apartment. Tom sat in his worn recliner, his hands gripping the armrests, his eyes darting between Ethan and Lucas. Ethan stood rigid, his backpack still slung over one shoulder, as if ready to flee at any moment. Lucas, calm but watchful, stood beside him, his presence a quiet shield against the tension. "Sit," Tom said gruffly, pointing to the couch. His voice was weaker than Ethan remembered, strained by illness or regret or both. Ethan hesitated, then sat, Lucas following. Mia hovered near the doorway, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, her eyes pleading for this to go well. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the faint tick of a wall clock. Tom cleared his throat. "Mia said you were coming." Didn't believe her. His gaze settled on Ethan, searching, as if trying to reconcile the boy he'd raised with the man before him. Ethan wanted to speak, to unleash years of hurt, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, Lucas spoke, his voice steady but warm. "Mr. Carter, Ethan's here because he cares, despite everything." Tom's jaw tightened, and Ethan braced for the outburst he'd grown up fearing. But it didn't come. Instead, Tom's eyes dropped to his hands, knuckles white. "I didn't know you'd turn out like this," he said, the words halting. "When you told me, I thought it was a phase, something I could fix." Ethan flinched, the old wound reopening. Lucas's hand found his, a subtle squeeze that kept him grounded. "It's not something to fix," Ethan said, his voice low but firm, the first words he'd spoken since entering. "It's who I am." Tom's eyes flickered with something guilt, maybe, or shame. He didn't respond, and the silence stretched again, heavy with unspoken apologies. Lucas leaned forward, his tone gentle but unyielding. "Mr. Carter, Ethan's built a life. A good one. He's got a job, friends, me. But he's never stopped missing you." Ethan shot Lucas a look, half grateful, half embarrassed. Lucas pressed on. "He's here because Mia said you're sick, and because he's hoping there's still a chance to be family again." Tom's face crumpled, just for a moment, before he caught himself. "Cancer," he said bluntly. "Doctors give me 6 months, maybe less." The words hit Ethan like a punch. He'd imagined this reunion 1,000 times, but never like this, never with a ticking clock. Mia let out a small sob from the doorway, and Ethan's resolve wavered. He wanted to hate his father, to walk away and never look back. But the man in front of him wasn't the towering figure of his childhood. He was frail, broken, human. "Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan asked, his voice cracking. Tom shrugged, a tired gesture. "Didn't think you'd care." "Not after." He trailed off. But Ethan knew the rest. "Not after I threw you out. Not after I chose my pride over my son." Lucas spoke again, his voice cutting through the haze. "Mr. Carter, Ethan's not here to fight. He's here to understand. And maybe to help you understand him." Tom's eyes met Lucas's, and for the first time, there was no hostility, only curiosity. "You're the one he's with?" Tom asked, almost to himself. Lucas nodded, unflinching. "Yeah, and I love him." The admission hung in the air, bold and unapologetic. Ethan's chest tightened, torn between gratitude for Lucas's courage and fear of his father's reaction. Tom said nothing, just stared at the floor, his hands trembling slightly. Mia stepped forward, breaking the tension. "Dad, just listen to them. Please." Her voice was small but fierce, a reminder of the family they'd all lost. Tom nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm listening." It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was a crack in the wall between them. Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Fragile but real. Lucas squeezed his hand again. And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel alone in this house. As the evening wore on, they talked haltingly at first, then with more ease. Ethan spoke of his life in New York, his job as a graphic designer, the way Lucas had helped him heal. Lucas shared stories of their life together, small moments that made Ethan smile despite himself. Tom listened, asking few questions, but his silence felt different now, not angry, but thoughtful. Mia chimed in, bridging the gap with stories of her own, her voice a lifeline pulling them together. By the time they left for the night, staying at a nearby motel, Ethan felt lighter, though the weight of the past still lingered. Lucas, ever the optimist, smiled as they walked into the cool Virginia night. "That was a start," he said. Ethan nodded, unsure if he believed it, but wanting to. Tomorrow, they'd return. Tomorrow, they'd try again. The motel room was small, the kind with thin walls and a faint musty smell. But to Ethan, it felt like a sanctuary. He lay on the stiff bed, staring at the ceiling, while Lucas sat cross-legged beside him, sketching in his notebook. The soft scratch of pencil on paper was the only sound, grounding Ethan in the present. "You okay?" Lucas asked, not looking up. Ethan didn't answer right away. Was he okay? He'd faced his father, the man who'd shattered his world, and walked away without breaking. That had to count for something. "I don't know what I expected," Ethan said finally, his voice quiet. He didn't yell. He didn't apologize either. Lucas set his notebook aside, his hazel eyes soft but searching. He listened. "Ethan, that's more than you thought you'd get." Ethan nodded, but the ache in his chest didn't ease. Listening wasn't the same as understanding, and understanding wasn't the same as acceptance. The next morning, they returned to the house. Mia greeted them with coffee, her smile brighter than the day before. "Dad's in the garage," she said, leading them through the house. The garage was Tom's domain, a cluttered space filled with tools, car parts, and the faint smell of oil. Tom was there, tinkering with an old radio, his movements slow but deliberate. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said, setting the radio down. "We're here for the week," Ethan said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Figured we'd talk more." Tom nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Fair enough." The conversation started slowly, circling around safe topics: Mia's school, the weather, the town's changes. But Lucas, ever direct, steered it deeper. "Mr. Carter, what was Ethan like as a kid?" he asked, a smile playing at his lips. Tom hesitated, then chuckled. A rough sound. Stubborn. Always drawing, even when he was supposed to be doing chores. Ethan felt a pang, remembering those days scribbling in notebooks, his dad ruffling his hair with a mix of pride and exasperation. For a moment, the garage felt like a bridge to that time, before everything broke. As the day went on, Ethan noticed small shifts in his father. Tom asked about Ethan's work, his life in New York, even Lucas's job at the coffee shop. The questions were clumsy, but they were something. Lucas, sensing the opening, shared more about their life together, how they'd met at a bookstore, how Ethan's art had landed him a big client last month. Tom listened, his face softening, though he still flinched at mentions of their relationship. That evening, over dinner, Mia's attempt at spaghetti Tom surprised them. "You still draw?" he asked Ethan, his tone almost shy. Ethan nodded, pulling out his phone to show a digital sketch of Lucas, asleep on their couch. Tom studied it, his eyes lingering. "You're good," he said simply, and Ethan felt a lump in his throat. It was the closest thing to praise he'd heard from his father in years. But the past wasn't so easily buried. Later, as they cleared the table, Tom's voice grew sharp. "I don't get it," he said, looking at Ethan. "This life you're living, it's not what I raised you for." The room went still. Mia froze, her hands clutching a plate. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, letting Ethan respond. "I didn't choose this to hurt you," Ethan said, his voice shaking but clear. "I chose it to be honest. To be me." Tom's face hardened, but he didn't interrupt. Ethan pressed on. "You threw me out because you couldn't handle it. But I'm still your son. And I'm happy." The last word felt like a defiance, a truth he'd fought to claim. Tom didn't respond, just stood and walked to the living room, leaving the air heavy. Mia touched Ethan's arm, her eyes apologetic. "He's trying," she whispered. Lucas pulled Ethan close, his voice low. "You said what you needed to. That's enough for now." But Ethan wasn't sure it was. The truth was out, but the distance between him and his father felt as wide as ever. As they left for the motel, Ethan glanced back at the house, the porch light glowing like a beacon. He didn't know if they'd ever bridge the gap, but for the first time, he felt like he'd stood his ground. Lucas's hand in his was a reminder that, no matter what, he wasn't alone. The Virginia sun was relentless, beating down on the town's quiet streets as Ethan and Lucas walked to the local diner. Mia had insisted on a break from the house, a chance to catch up away from Tom's shadow. The diner, with its checkered floors and jukebox humming old country tunes, felt like a time capsule. Ethan slid into a booth, his mind still replaying last night's confrontation. Lucas, ever observant, nudged him. "You're brooding again," he teased, stealing a fry from Mia's plate. Mia laughed, but her eyes were serious. "Dad's been different since you got here," she said, stirring her milkshake. "He's not good at saying it, but he's proud of you. I heard him talking to Mom's picture last night, saying he messed up." Ethan's chest tightened. His mother, gone 3 years now, had been the one who tried to keep the family together, even after Tom's ultimatum. Her absence was a wound they all shared. Back at the house, Tom was in the backyard, tending to a small garden, his late wife's project, now overgrown but still alive. Ethan watched from the porch, hesitant. Lucas gave him a gentle push. "Go talk to him. Just you." Ethan nodded, his feet heavy as he approached. Tom looked up, squinting against the sun. "Didn't hear you come out," he said, brushing dirt from his hands. Ethan sat on a nearby bench, the silence between them familiar but less hostile. "Mom loved this garden," he said, his voice soft. Tom nodded, his eyes distant. "She'd be out here every morning, talking to the roses like they could hear her." A faint smile crossed his face, then faded. "She'd have hated what I did to you." The admission caught Ethan off guard. He waited, sensing there was more. Tom's voice was rough when he spoke again. "I was scared, Ethan. When you told me, I didn't know how to handle it. Thought I was losing you to something I couldn't understand." Ethan's throat burned, but he stayed quiet, letting his father continue. "I was wrong, but I don't know how to fix it." Ethan wanted to scream, to demand why it had taken 5 years, and a terminal diagnosis for Tom to say this. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he said, "I needed you. Dad." "I still do." Tom's eyes met his, raw and unguarded. For the first time, Ethan saw not the man who'd rejected him, but the one who'd taught him to ride a bike, who'd cheered at his little league games. They talked longer. The conversation slow but real. Tom asked about Ethan's art, about New York, even about Lucas, not with warmth, but with curiosity. Ethan answered honestly, sharing pieces of his life he'd thought his father would never care to know. When Lucas and Mia joined them, the mood lightened. Lucas told stories of their city adventures, making Mia laugh and even drawing a chuckle from Tom. That evening, Tom pulled out an old photo album, its pages yellowed but cherished. They sat around the living room, flipping through memories: Ethan's first birthday, family trips to the coast, his mother's smile. Tom's hand lingered on a photo of Ethan at 16, sketching by the lake. "You were always drawing," he said, almost to himself. "Still are?" Ethan nodded, his heart full and aching. As they left for the night, Tom stopped them at the door. "Come back tomorrow," he said, his voice gruff but earnest. "We've got more to talk about." Ethan nodded, a flicker of hope igniting. Lucas squeezed his hand, his smile saying what words couldn't. "We're getting there." Back at the motel, Ethan lay awake, the day's emotions swirling. He'd seen glimpses of the father he'd loved, the one he'd lost. But the road ahead was uncertain, and his truth was still a wall between them. Lucas, half asleep beside him, murmured, "You're doing great, Ethan." "He's listening." Ethan hoped he was right, but the weight of 5 years lingered, a reminder that some wounds heal slower than others. The next day brought rain, a steady drizzle that turned the Virginia streets slick and gray. Ethan and Lucas arrived at the house to find Tom in the living room, a stack of letters on the coffee table. Mia explained they were from their mother, written to Tom before she died. "She wanted you to read them, Ethan," Mia said, her voice soft. "Dad found them last week." Ethan's hands trembled as he opened the first letter. His mother's handwriting was a jolt, each loop and curve a piece of her he thought he'd lost. "Tom, talk to our boy. He's still ours, no matter who he loves." The words blurred as Ethan's eyes filled. He read on, letter after letter, each one a plea for Tom to see Ethan for who he was, not who Tom wanted him to be. Lucas sat close, his presence steady, while Tom stared out the window, his face unreadable. "Why didn't you show me these before?" Ethan asked, his voice thick. Tom's shoulders sagged. "Didn't think I could face you. Not after what I did." The admission hung heavy, a confession years in the making. Ethan wanted to be angry, but the letters softened him, reminding him of his mother's hope for them both. The rain kept them inside, and the day became a quiet unraveling of truths. Tom spoke of his own upbringing, a strict father who saw weakness as failure. "I thought I was protecting you," he said, his voice breaking. "Thought I was teaching you to be strong." Ethan shook his head. "You taught me to hide." The words were sharp, but Tom didn't flinch, just nodded, as if finally seeing the damage. Lucas, sensing the need for balance, shared his own story growing up in a small Ohio town, coming out to parents who embraced him, flaws and all. "It wasn't perfect," he said, glancing at Ethan, "but it showed me love doesn't have to hurt." Tom listened, his eyes flickering with something like envy. Mia, curled up on the couch, added, "Mom would have loved Lucas. She'd have loved you both." The letters became a bridge, a way to talk about the past without drowning in it. Ethan shared memories of his mother, her laughter, her quiet strength, and Tom listened, adding his own. For the first time, They grieved her together. Not as enemies, but as a family fractured but not broken. Lucas and Mia chimed in, their voices weaving a fragile tapestry of connection. By evening, the rain had stopped, and Tom suggested a walk to the lake. It was a place Ethan hadn't been since he was a kid. A place of fishing trips and summer evenings. They walked in silence. The crunch of gravel underfoot the only sound. At the lake's edge, Tom stopped, his breath uneven. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said, the words raw and unpolished. "I was wrong. I don't know if I can make it right, but I want to try." Ethan's chest ached, torn between relief and the weight of years. "I don't need you to fix it," he said. "I just need you to see me." Tom nodded, his eyes wet. Lucas stood a step behind, his smile small but proud. Mia hugged her father, then Ethan, her arms a tether pulling them closer. As they walked back, the sky cleared, stars peeking through the clouds. Ethan felt lighter, not because the past was erased, but because it was shared. Lucas's hand in his was a reminder of the life he'd built, the love that had carried him through. Tom's apology wasn't a cure, but it was a start. And for now, that was enough. The week was slipping away, each day a delicate dance of rebuilding. Ethan woke to the sound of Lucas humming in the motel bathroom, a habit that always made him smile. Today, they'd planned to help Tom with the garden, a project Mia insisted would fix everything. Ethan wasn't so sure, but the idea of working side by side with his father felt like a step toward something new. At the house, Tom was already outside, kneeling in the dirt, his movements slow but determined. Ethan joined him, Lucas and Mia following with tools and a bag of bulbs. The garden was a mess of overgrown weeds, wilted roses, but there was something hopeful in its chaos. "Your mom would have hated this," Tom said, pulling a weed. Ethan nodded, grabbing a shovel. "She'd have made us fix it." They worked through the morning, the air filled with the scent of earth and possibility. Lucas, ever practical, organized the tools, while Mia planted bulbs with a childlike focus. Tom and Ethan talked as they worked. Small things at first, memories of family barbecues. Ethan's old treehouse. Then Tom asked, "You happy in New York?" Ethan paused, surprised. "Yeah," he said. "It's home now." Tom nodded, his eyes on the dirt. "Good. That's good." Lucas, wiping sweat from his brow, chimed in. "He's being modest. He's got this big art show coming up. Gallery in Manhattan." Tom's eyebrows rose, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "That's so?" he asked Ethan, who shrugged, embarrassed. "It's just a start," Ethan said, but Lucas's grin said otherwise. The conversation shifted to Lucas, his dreams of opening a coffee shop, his sketches that filled notebooks. Tom listened, asking questions, his curiosity genuine. Ethan watched, amazed at how Lucas could disarm his father with nothing but honesty. Mia, sensing the shift, teased, "Dad, you should see Lucas's drawings. They're almost as good as Ethan's." Tom chuckled, a sound Ethan hadn't heard in years. By afternoon, the garden looked alive again, patches of order amid the chaos. They sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, the silence comfortable for the first time. Tom spoke, his voice low. "I've been reading your mom's letters every night. She was right about a lot." He looked at Ethan, then Lucas. "I don't understand everything about you two, but I'm trying." Ethan's heart swelled, but he didn't know how to respond. Lucas, ever the bridge, said, "That's all anyone can ask. Mr. Carter." Tom nodded, his eyes distant but soft. Mia leaned against Ethan, her voice quiet. This is what Mom wanted. Ethan squeezed her hand, feeling the truth of it. That evening, Tom invited them to stay for dinner, his first real gesture of welcome. They cooked together, a clumsy but warm effort. Lucas chopping vegetables, Mia setting the table, Ethan and Tom grilling burgers outside. The meal was simple, but it felt like a celebration, a reclaiming of something lost. Tom raised his glass water. Not beer. A nod to his health and said, "To family." Ethan's eyes stung as he clinked glasses. Lucas's hand warm under the table. As they left, Tom walked them to the door. "You're coming back tomorrow, right?" he asked, almost anxious. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, Dad. We'll be here." The word Dad felt foreign but right. A small victory. Lucas's smile was radiant as they stepped into the night, the stars brighter than before. Back at the motel, Ethan lay beside Lucas, his mind racing. "I didn't think he'd ever change," he admitted. Lucas kissed his forehead. "He's not there yet, but he's moving. And so are you." Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of the past lighter, the future a little clearer. The final day in Virginia dawned clear, the air crisp with the promise of fall. Ethan woke with a mix of dread and hope. Today was their last chance before heading back to New York. The week had been a whirlwind of small breakthroughs. But the biggest questions remained. Could Tom truly accept Ethan? Could they be a family again? At the house, Tom was waiting on the porch, a thermos of coffee in hand. "Thought we'd take a drive," he said, his voice gruff but warm. Ethan exchanged a glance with Lucas, who nodded encouragingly. They piled into Tom's old pickup, Mia in the front, Ethan and Lucas in the back. The drive was quiet, the countryside rolling past, until they reached Lake Anna, their old fishing spot. The lake was calm, its surface a mirror for the sky. Tom handed Ethan a fishing rod, a silent nod to their past. They cast their lines, the rhythm familiar despite the years. Lucas and Mia sat on the shore, skipping stones, their laughter a soft backdrop. "You used to love this," Tom said, his eyes on the water. Ethan nodded. "Still do." The conversation turned to the future, Ethan's art show, Lucas's coffee shop dreams, Mia's college plans. Tom listened, his questions thoughtful, his silences less heavy. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "I was wrong about you, Ethan." "About all of it." Ethan's breath caught. Tom continued, his voice unsteady. "I thought I was doing right by you, pushing you to be someone else. But you're better than I ever was." Ethan's eyes burned, but he held Tom's gaze. "I just wanted you to see me," he said. Tom nodded, his face crumpling. "I see you now." It was the apology Ethan had waited years for. Raw and imperfect, but real. He didn't know if he could forgive fully, but he wanted to try. Lucas and Mia joined them, sensing the shift. Tom looked at Lucas, his expression softer than before. "You take care of him," he said. Not a question, but a request. Lucas smiled. "Always." Mia hugged her father, then Ethan, her eyes shining. The moment wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They spent the day by the lake, fishing, talking, laughing. Tom shared stories of his own youth, mistakes he'd made, lessons he'd learned too late. Ethan opened up about his fears, his dreams, the life he'd built with Lucas. By the time they drove back, the truck was filled with a warmth Ethan hadn't felt in years. That evening, Tom gave Ethan a small box, his mother's old sketchbook, filled with drawings she'd done for him. "She'd want you to have it," Tom said. Ethan clutched it, overwhelmed. As they said goodbye, Tom pulled Ethan into a hug, awkward but fierce. "Come back soon," he said. Ethan nodded. his throat tight. We will. In the motel that night, Ethan and Lucas packed for the morning bus. Ethan held the sketchbook, tracing his mother's lines. I didn't think this was possible, he admitted. Lucas wrapped his arms around him. You made it possible. You and your stubborn heart. Ethan laughed. The sound light and free. The bus back to New York hummed along the highway, the Virginia hills fading into the distance. Ethan leaned against Lucas, the sketchbook in his lap, his mind replaying the week. It hadn't been a fairy tale. There were no grand gestures, no perfect resolution, but it was real. Tom's apology, his effort to understand, was a beginning, not an end. Back in Brooklyn, life resumed its rhythm. Ethan threw himself into his art show, his paintings infused with a new depth, colors bold with hope and pain. Lucas was there every step, hanging frames, cracking jokes, stealing kisses in the gallery's backroom. The show was a success. Critics praising Ethan's raw, emotional honesty. He sent a photo of the gallery to Mia, who texted back, "Dad's bragging about you to everyone." Months passed, and Ethan and Tom kept in touch, short calls, awkward but steady, and letters filled with updates. Tom's health declined, but he stayed in the garden, sending Ethan photos of blooming roses. Mia visited New York, her laughter filling their apartment, a reminder of the family they were rebuilding. One evening, Lucas proposed, not with a ring, but with a sketch, a drawing of them by Lake Anna, hands entwined. Ethan said yes, tears mixing with laughter. They called Tom, nervous but hopeful. His voice was weak but warm. About time, he said, and Ethan could hear the smile. It wasn't full acceptance. Not yet. But it was love, clumsy and earnest. When Tom's condition worsened, Ethan and Lucas returned to Virginia. They spent his final weeks together, not as strangers, but as a family, imperfect, scarred, but whole. Tom passed quietly, holding Ethan's hand, Lucas and Mia close. His last words to Ethan were, "I'm proud of you." They buried him by the lake, near the roses he'd tended, a place of peace. Ethan and Lucas married a year later, a small ceremony in Brooklyn, Mia as their witness. The sketchbook sat on a table, open to a drawing of the Lockie, a reminder of where they'd been and what they'd overcome. Ethan's art now hung in galleries, but his greatest work was the life he'd built. With Lucas, with Mia, with the memory of a father who'd learned to see him. As they stood together, watching the city lights, Ethan felt the weight of the past lift. Love hadn't erased the pain, but it had carved a path through it. He squeezed Lucas's hand, grateful for the man who'd knocked on his father's door with the truth and changed everything.